Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we're going to be using some older products, the sand background, the Hello Summer stamps and dies, and then the Flippin' Fabulous stamps and dies. Totally love this set. I have made cards with it in the past. We're also going to be using, different for me, I know, a lot of pattern paper. So I'm just going through a couple of the packs. Honeybee does have some of these on sale right now because they're moving from they used to have pads that were 6x6 and now they're moving more to the, I don't know what size this is. I'm sorry. But anywho, I just wanted to show you, even though we're making a beachy card, the paper packs that you use don't necessarily have to be beachy. So I went through and I picked out some colors for my seashells that I thought would be really pretty. This is which one is this? The Marvelous Moments. It's just it's a great muted kind of palette. So I picked out some like peaches, pinks, corals, beiges, some grays. This one is Vitamin C. I am going to be using this for my background in my card. Everything in here, I did no ink blending, nothing. Everything is pattern paper. Which honestly, I used to do a lot, but I haven't in a long time. So basically the point of today's video is showing you how you can take your use of pattern paper and still give it texture and dimension. This is the newest paper pack. This is the Adventure Awaits. This has absolutely nothing to do with beaches, but I love this one, even though it's not appropriate for my card. But there's a bunch of ones in here that are really great color palettes for the beachy cards that I'm making. So here I'm going to use this one, but I'm only going to use the sky portion. The Hot Tropic one is one of the ones I believe that's on sale. And for these, I was looking for a pattern for my flip-flops. And there's a couple of really, really great ones in here. I totally love that little like Hawaiian print. But I didn't end up finding one that matched the same color palette that I had going on for my seashells and my water. So even though I flipped through it a couple of times, I actually ended up picking one from the summer stem set. I also snagged out that one, that pretty gradient for my shells. And I love these florals. I did another beach card was it last summer? I think it was last summer, with some patterns from the same pack. So ultimately I ended up going with like this peachy kind of floral for my the base pattern of my flip-flops because it matched everything that I had going on. They have a lot of really great basic ones that's like pinstripes or polka dots. I use some of those as well. But here I am trimming down and this is why they're switching to that size. Like they have been using it for months, but it's because you can cut it in half and still have like two A2 size cards. So I am going to use the sand. You saw me just tear it in half, and the water. I'm going to use the same. Everything's the same. We're going to do one that has no dimension, no added dimension, I should say. And then we're going to do one that has the other extra things that you can kind of do to, bump up your dimension. So here, this will be the one that doesn't have any added dimension. And that white tear in the border is going to act as our surf. This is the one we're going to add some dimension to. Enter the sand background. If you don't have this background, I use it every summer, just FYI. And we're going to use it to not only add some more dimension to our sand, but we're going to use it to add texture as well. So I am stamping it in our Be Creative gold pigment ink. I forgot to treat my paper with my anti-static tool. That's why you saw the panic hand. But I'm going to stamp it down and then I'm going to heat emboss it. And so this will create another dimension of sand on my paper, but then it will also give us something that we can actually feel Plus, the metallic is a super cool ad because, as you know, when you go to the beach, you can see it kind of like glistening in the sun. So this gives us all of those things. If you didn't want to do the embossing, you could still just stamp with the gold like I did here. You just need to give it a second to dry because it is a pigment ink. It does take longer. So just going to sprinkle on some gold embossing powder, and then I'm going to use my tweezers to hold it so that I can apply my heat gun. Since it is an all-over stamping, it can be a little tricky to find a place to hold it at, and the tweezers are super helpful for that because my fingers are not made of asbestos. So, yeah. How did I come up with this idea? I used to use pattern paper all the time. And then companies started coming out with like background stamps and cover plates and things like that. And I found that I got much more enjoyment out of making my own, but I still hoard my pattern paper. So here you can see the difference in the two and just how that texture kind of bumps it up. Now we're going to go ahead and adhere these down to their card bases. I'm doing the water first because I want the beach to be the larger portion, and I just tore them in half. So because I want the beach to be the larger portion, I'm going to put that on top. And for the one that we're not adding any extras to, this will be the finished background. We're not going to do anything else to it. And I will say, like, the little paper tearing, which was huge back when I first started card making, does make a suitable surf. But now, now that I've been card making for a long time and I enjoy the dimension and the texture and I realize how much interest that adds to my cards, I'm going to do something different on this one over here. So yeah, I think it's not that one is better than the other. I think that they just provide different looks. And so if you're like, Kelly, I don't want all this extra, I'm happy with my, my pattern paper the way it is. Awesome. That's great. But if you are looking to maybe step it up a notch, I'm just going to show you some things that you can do, and you don't even have to do all of them. You could just do some of them. So here I'm going in with my Versamark ink pad, and I am just putting down some clear embossing ink right where I want the surf to be, also where I want some waves to be coming in on the background. And then I'm going to use a white puff embossing powder, and you're going to see when we put it on is a hot mess, is a total hot mess. But that's okay. That's what a dry paintbrush is for. Truly. I mean, that's how I'm going to get it to look the way that I want it to look. I'm just going to go in, I'm going to clean up the edges so that they're more rounded, where it's like coming onto the beach. And then for the surf that's in the water, I'm just going to kind of randomly swish my paintbrush around so that I get a little bit of... I don't even want to call it a gradient, but like, so there's a little bit of a difference between how much water you can see and how thick the embossing powder is. And then for the ones that are rolling in, they're going to be much thinner. Just because they haven't crashed yet, which is what causes all of that, like, really bold white surf on the beach. And you can see that I did extend it out a little bit. I skipped that part. So first things first, as soon as I start heating this, you can see that it starts puffing up, which is super cool and gives us this texture that we can feel, but also creates that look of surf. The other thing that you can notice right away is that it lifted my sandpaper. So I'm going to do it again. And this time I'm really just concentrating the embossing right where it meets the paper. And I'm going to do two things different this time. The first thing that I'm going to do different is, instead of just sprinkling on the embossing powder and brushing off the excess, I'm going to take my excess and I'm going to scoop it to where it meets the paper. So that way I know that that area is all filled in, and then I'm going to make sure I clean off really well all the rest of the paper, because I just want it to be kind of lumped up where it meets the paper. The second thing that I'm going to do to keep from blowing off all of that embossing powder is I'm going to heat it from the back first. And then once it starts to melt, it's going to melt into the embossing powder that's already there. You can see it turning. And then once it has started to melt, I can then hit it from the front and make sure everything is melted down and, you know, it's puffed up and like smoothed out. And then that's going to connect to the two so that you can't see that paper in between. Here, I am stamping all of my shells, my flip-flops, did I use anything else? No, I think it was just shells and flip-flops. But I'm not going to show you the majority of the stamping because I stamped so many shells, y'all. Like so many, because I didn't know what I was going to use to put them all together, and I wanted to be able to use the same ones on each card. So every time I had to stamp them twice. So I just stamped and stamped and stamped. I am using our Intense Black ink, which is safe for Copic markers. And then I'm going to cut all of them out with dies. Now, typically you see with pattern paper, you see more fussy cutting. I'm not going to do that. I don't even mind fussy cutting. It wouldn't even have bothered me to do that, but I wanted to show you how you can use the dies and you can still blend them into your background. I love these shells. They're so pretty. And so here's all of them. This is everything kind of cut out. The only portion that I did not use a die for is the strap part of the flip-flop. And for that, I am going to have to fussy cut it so that I can lay it down on top and it's a perfect fit. But for everything else, because it's going into the background of my card, I just used the dies. It was easier. A couple of tips for fussy cutting. If you're new here and you haven't seen them, you want to hold your paper in your non-dominant hand, keep your scissors straight up in your dominant hand, and then turn your paper, not your scissors. This is going to give you a much smoother cut. And then when we're done with the fussy cutting, the other thing that I always like to do is go around the edges with a, not a Copic marker. You want a water-based marker. The one that I use is a Memento Tuxedo Black marker. And this is, if you've stamped in black, it just gives a really nice finished edge. So I just went ahead and went through and cut out the rest of the little straps. And now I'm going to go in and do that Memento black marker, and I always do it from the back in case the marker slips and makes a mark. It's not on the front and nobody will see it because that part will be glued down. Then this is the only piece that we have to like build, is just put these two together, which by the way, are these flip-flops not absolutely darling? I mean, I would totally wear those little flower flip-flops. I think they're stinking cute. But I like florals in my clothes, in my cards, in my vase on my table. It doesn't really matter. I like flowers. So I'm going to adhere those down. And again, and obviously as we go, you'll see like one portion of it will be colored, which is where we're adding the dimension. In order to add the dimension, I am using alcohol markers and I'm only using grays. So you don't even need a ton of markers to make this happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with my darkest gray and I'm going to color in the outline of my flip-flop. So I'm just going to color that portion in so I can see the actual image. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in a shadow of the strap because they would be up above. So they would cast a shadow down onto the flip-flop. Super easy to do because it's just a V shape. You just want to follow those same lines. Give yourself a little bit of a gap because the shadow wouldn't necessarily be right underneath it. And then for the rest of the shading, I'm just going to go in from the left and the right hand sides just to give it a little bit more dimension. And that's just with the mid-tone and the lightest color. So you can see them sitting next to each other, how one looks way more dimensional than the other. For the strap, I went in with my darkest gray and added shading where it's bent back. And then I also added just a little bit of shading to the inside edges and the top part, which would be like inserted down into the flip-flop. That's the connecting piece. And once those are done and being colored, I am going to now adhere these straps, and then these flip-flops are done. So like I said 5 minutes ago, we're just using grays. You can shade anything with grays. The ones I typically use are cool grays and warm grays, just depending upon what colors I'm using. But if you have the toner grays or the neutral grays, those will also work. You don't need a bunch of colors to get a lot of dimension out of what you have. So the one on the right, we've added dimension. The one on the left is just the pattern paper. We're going to go through all of the shells this way. Typically, when you're adding shading to any kind of object, and I say that, you guys are probably so sick. If you're a follower, you're probably so sick of hearing me say it. It's any point where two things meet or where one object lays on top of another. So we're not really going to have too much laying one on top of another, with the shells per se, but you will have lines where everything meets, and that's where you want to add the majority of your shading. We're not looking to completely cover up the pattern that we chose. We want to let that pattern paper kind of shine through. We're just looking to accent the shape of the shell. So the smaller ones are much harder to do that with than the larger ones, but you can see there's a vast difference in the amount of dimension that we're getting in the ones that we're adding a little bit of shading to. And again, don't cover up the whole thing. You chose this color or this pattern or this paper for a reason. You just want to accent it. You don't want to cover it. So, yeah, it's kind of like when you color something white and you're just adding the shadows. That's all we're doing here. We're just adding in the shadows and letting the color of the paper underneath shine through. I think that this is a super fun way to incorporate, if you're like me and you're like a pattern paper hoarder, to get them out and to use them, but to use them in a way that's still very satisfying creatively. Some people, like I said, the pattern paper in and of itself will be enough. For me, it's not. For me, I like to make my cards look different. I want my card to look like my card, and your card should look like your card. But a lot of times when I'm just stamping and die cutting, they don't feel any different than what anybody else would do. And so it's not satisfying the need that I have to be creative. I want to make them just a bit different, a bit, for me, it's the dimension I love and a little bit of texture, but mostly the dimension that I love. So for this little swirly one, I decided to add a little bit of a design, just again, to make it look a little bit different. So I just did some little darker flicks that would give it more of a spiral look. Another way that I colored these, which you'll see, like when you see them in their totality, I did stippling. So I did some little dots, a series of dots in the same colors, which was another great way to add a little bit of personality to that particular one. I apologize that as we're moving along, the shells keep getting lower and lower, and it's because I just kept pushing them up. So I was like interfering with my own coloring space. But yeah, I think we only have one more to do, which I think is the starfish, because there's a lot of other ones that are the same. They're just stamped on different patterns. So I didn't show you all of those. I showed you kind of one of each of the ones that we ended up using. And then I just called it, because this video is still, a pretty decent amount long. So yeah, I feel like this is pretty apt since I just got back from the beach, which was lovely. We only had rain one day. And I was really, really surprised because when we took Peanut to the beach, when he was like 1.5 years old, he did not like the beach. He didn't like the sand. He didn't like the waves. It was too loud. He just didn't like it. Here, what I'm going to go through and do is I'm just going to glue. This is everything laid out how it is. I'm just going to go through and glue everything down flat. And then there's a couple of other things that we'll do to complete the cards. But yeah, so he didn't like it. But Miss Little Jelly Bean, my little sassafras, she loved the beach. She wanted to stand in between mommy and daddy, or daddy and grandma, or mommy and nana, and have her hands held so that when the waves came in, she wasn't, because we were in the Outer Banks and they were a little bit strong. She would like to jump up over the waves or jump into the waves. She had a ton of fun. She also thoroughly enjoyed, my mom got her a little pool that we filled up with water so she could play with her, sand in the water, and it had a little like canopy that covered it. So she was out of the sun. She totally loved the beach. She did great. The whole 2 hours or 2.5 hours or whatever we were at the beach, she rocked it the whole time. So here what you see me doing is, remember I told you that I'm using dyes because it was easier. So what I'm doing now is I'm going in with other Copic markers to blend it in the outline into the sand. This is, or it can be, a little bit tricky because, obviously the brown is going to look different on the pink paper than it will on the white paper. So you can see on the ones that are pink, I'm going back in with a much cooler brown to kind of knot back those warm tones to help it blend better. I'm also going in with a white gel pen and adding some highlights or some dots, just something to add a little bit more interest to the seashells. This is another way that you can, kind of bump up your pattern paper without covering up the pattern per se, and just stretch it a little more, make it more your own. So now these are all done. I got to trim them because you can see my flip-flops and some of my shells are hanging off the bottom. So I'm just going to trim those down. If I had put in less water, I probably would have been able to fit the whole flip-flop, but I tore them where I tore them, and it was what it was. And it was what it was. I just accepted it. I do think that the vitamin C pack, which is where I got the background ones, are so great. That water looks so cool. For the sentiments, I chose, they're from the Flippin' Fabulous, and there's one, which is what we're stamping now, on this teal color that says, "I hope your birthday is." And then there's 2 sentiments that you can use with it. One says Flippin' Fabulous and one says Flippin' Awesome. And so I just decided I was going to stamp 2 of the Hope Your Birthday Is, and heat emboss them in white on teal. And then the second part of the sentiment, I just stamped in black on white because I'm going to put that where the surf goes. And this section of the sentiment is going to go where the water is. So just to help them kind of blend in more, and then they'll be cut out with their companion dyes as well. So yeah, it's so funny how your kids are totally different, because Peanut was a pool kid, and he still, he likes the beach, don't get me wrong, but he still could spend hours in the pool, just happy. Caitlin tended to get bored at the pool, mostly because I think she can't swim on her own. She's got to be attached to somebody, and she's a very independent little baby, so I think that was her bigger problem at the pool, is she would get bored because she couldn't just be as independent as she wanted to be. But it will be interesting to see next summer, as she has gotten older, if she enjoys the pool more. So I chose which one did I use? I love Honeybee Gems. Honeybee Gems, or the cat's pajamas. Happy Hearts is the one that I chose. And there's a pinkish white one, kind of like an Aurora Borealis look. Those are the ones I decided to go with to accent the sentiments. And then I did add some clear glitter to all of them, including the ones that are just the pattern paper with no extra dimension. And these are both the cards. So I hope that you learned a little something about how you can kind of stretch your pattern paper. I hope that you're interested in giving it a try. Remember, you don't have to do them all. You could just pick one or the other or whatever. But thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.